I don't know why some memories refuse to fade. You think time will soften them, that years will turn them into something gentle, something you can tuck away in the corners of your mind. But there are some moments that stay alive. They breathe with you, sleep with you, whisper your name when the world goes quiet. For me, that moment began on a rainy afternoon in the summer of 1968. I was 20 years old, working in a small bookshop near the harbor. It wasn't the kind of place people came to buy things. It was quiet, hidden, and smelled of ink and old wood. A place where time slowed down. I loved it there. Every shelf had its own story. Every creaking floorboard its own memory. I was shy then, the kind of girl who preferred books to people, dreams to noise. That day, the rain was falling so softly it sounded like someone whispering against the window. And that's when he walked in. He wasn't dressed like anyone from town. His coat was soaked through, and his hair was falling over his forehead, but there was something steady about the way he moved, as if the storm outside couldn't touch him. When he smiled, I forgot for a second that I'd never seen him before. "Do you have poetry?" he asked. Just like that. No hello, no small talk. Poetry. I remember blinking at him, a little surprised. Hardly anyone ever came looking for poetry. I led him to the back of the store, to a narrow shelf almost hidden behind a stack of history books. He ran his fingers along the spines and said softly, "You can tell a lot about a person by the poetry they read." I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled and said, "Then what does it say about you?" He looked up at me, eyes full of something I couldn't yet name, and said, "That I believe in things that don't always make sense but still feel true." From that day on, he came back every week. Sometimes he bought a book. Sometimes he just talked. About faraway places, about the sea, about stories he wanted to write one day. He said he wanted to be a journalist, to travel and tell people the truth about the world. And I told him I wanted to write too, not about the world but about hearts. He said, "Then maybe you'll write about me someday." And I laughed. I didn't know that one day I actually would. Weeks turned into months. He became a part of my days without me even realizing it. I'd catch myself arranging the same books he liked before he arrived, pretending to be busy when I saw his shadow through the glass door. He had a way of making the ordinary feel magical, a way of speaking that made you want to believe that everything, even pain, could have meaning. Once we walked to the harbor after closing. The air smelled of salt and wet earth. He said, "Do you ever wonder if people meet for a reason?" I remember thinking about it for a long time before answering. "Yes," I said, "but maybe not always for the reason we think." He smiled and said, "Then maybe our reason is still waiting to be written." That night I couldn't sleep. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was living inside a story, one I never wanted to end. But life doesn't ask for our permission to change. One morning, he came into the shop holding a letter. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said quietly, "I got a job offer. In London. It's everything I've worked for. I should be happy, but..." I remember the way his voice broke. "But it means leaving here. Leaving you." The world felt still. Even the ticking clock in the shop seemed to hold its breath. He told me he'd write. Every week. He promised he'd come back after 1 year. And I, foolishly, believed that promises were stronger than distance. The day he left, I went with him to the train station. It was early morning, mist floating over the fields, his suitcase by his side. He held my hands and said, "No matter what happens, remember, you'll always find me in words." And then he was gone. First, I believed he'd write. Every morning I'd rush to the mailbox, heart pounding. Every day that passed without a letter felt like a small heartbreak I couldn't explain. A week became a month. A month turned into 3. And then 6. When the first winter came without a word from him, I told myself maybe he was just busy. When the second winter came, I told myself maybe he'd changed his mind. And when the third came, I stopped telling myself anything at all. My father died that year. I remember sitting at the kitchen table after the funeral, numb, staring at the teapot still half full, the world moving on without me. I asked my mother once quietly if a letter had ever come for me. She didn't look at me when she said no. Something in her eyes made me believe her, and yet not completely. After that, I stopped waiting. I told myself love was a kind of madness, and I'd already been mad enough. Years passed. I learned to smile again, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. I filled my days with ordinary things, cooking, working, pretending I didn't care. But every night, when the world went quiet, I'd open my journal and write to him. Letters that would never be sent. Words that felt like breathing. Dear Thomas, I'd begin. And then I'd tell him everything. About the rain that day, the book I read, the silence I couldn't escape. I kept them all. Every single letter. In a wooden box under my bed. Sometimes I'd take them out just to remind myself that once, I'd loved someone so deeply that even silence couldn't erase him. When I turned 28, my mother said, "It's time to move on." So I did what was expected. I married a man who was kind and patient. He loved me in the way steady things love, quietly without question. And I tried to love him back. But some hearts, they never really belong to the present. Mine stayed in that little bookshop, forever 19, waiting for a man who would never walk through the door again. The letter continued. I tried to write sooner, Maggie. God knows I did. But something happened. The day after I left for London, there was an accident. My car went off the road. I woke up in a hospital 3 days later, broken ribs, a concussion, and a memory that refused to return. For months I couldn't remember where I came from, or who I had left behind. And when I finally did, when your name came back to me like a whisper in a storm, it was too late. The letters I wrote were never sent. Your mother came to see me once. She said you had moved on, that you were happy. She begged me not to disturb your peace. So I didn't. But not a day passed that I didn't wonder if I'd made a mistake. If you ever think of me, I hope it's with kindness. Because loving you was the truest thing I ever did. It was signed simply, Thomas. I don't remember how long I sat there. Minutes? Hours? All I know is that when I finally looked up, the tea in my cup had gone cold, and my tears had left little circles on the page. My mother had known. All these years she'd known. And she never told me. I wanted to be angry. But how do you stay angry at a ghost? That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the same window I used to watch the rain through as a girl, clutching that letter like it was proof that my memories had been real. The raindrops looked the same, sounded the same, smelled the same. Only I had changed. I kept whispering his name, Thomas, over and over, like saying it could summon the past back to me. But all it brought was silence, deep aching silence. The next morning I went up to the attic. I hadn't been there in years. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old wood. In the corner, under a worn quilt, was the wooden box I'd hidden decades ago. The one that held all my unsent letters to him. There they were, over 50 envelopes, all beginning the same way. Dear Thomas. I sat on the floor and started reading, one after another. Letters written in every season of my life. Spring when I still believed he'd return. Summer when I tried to move on. Winter when I finally stopped pretending. And in every one there was a piece of me, the version of myself that never healed, never stopped waiting. By the time I reached the last letter, the sun had set. I lit a candle and read it aloud, my voice trembling. It said, Dear Thomas, I think I finally understand what love really is. It's not about being together or growing old side by side. It's about carrying someone in your heart so deeply that even when time takes everything else away, their memory still keeps you warm. Wherever you are, I hope you're happy. If I could see you just once more, I'd tell you that I never stopped loving you. When I finished, I realized something. All those years, I thought I'd been writing letters to him. But maybe I'd been writing them to myself, to the part of me that needed to believe that what we had wasn't just a dream. I placed the old letters beside the one he'd written and tied them together with a silk ribbon. Then I whispered, After 40 years, you finally came back to me. But even as I said it, something inside me knew the story wasn't over. Because at the bottom of the envelope there was one more thing, a small folded note written in a different hand. It said, Mrs. Lane, My name is Elizabeth Carter. I found this letter among my father's things after he passed. He spoke of you often. He said you were the one who taught him what love really meant. I thought you should have this." I sat frozen, reading the name again and again. Elizabeth Carter. His daughter. Thomas had married. He'd built a life. He'd had a child. And yet, after all those years, he'd still kept my name alive in his memory. The ache that filled me then wasn't pain exactly. It was something gentler. A kind of bittersweet peace that comes when life finally tells you the ending you never got to read. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Thomas, for remembering me." That night, I lit a candle by the window. For the first time in 40 years, I didn't cry. I just sat there quiet, still feeling something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Closure. But sometimes, closure has its own secret waiting beneath it. Because that letter, the one his daughter sent, wasn't the only thing she left in the envelope. At the bottom of it was a photograph. And in that photograph was something I never expected to see. I didn't notice the photograph at first. It had slipped out of the envelope and fallen under the table. When I picked it up, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The edges were torn, faded by time, the colors washed away into sepia tones, but I knew that place. The old harbor. The same one where I'd met him all those years ago. And standing there, smiling at the camera, was Thomas. Older, yes. Gray at the temples, lines around his eyes, but still him. Still the man who once stood in a rain-soaked bookstore asking for poetry. Beside him stood a woman, and in her arms a little girl. But that wasn't what stole my breath. What made my hands tremble was what I saw in that little girl's face. Her eyes. They were mine. The same deep hazel, flecked with green around the edges. The same way her left eyebrow arched slightly higher than the right. Even the small birthmark just under her ear, the one I'd always tried to hide. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My mind refused to understand what my heart already knew. The girl in the photograph wasn't just his daughter. She was ours. I pressed the photo against my chest, my heart hammering. I whispered, "No, it can't be. But the truth doesn't care if you're ready. Comes for you anyway." I thought back to that last summer before he left. The way I'd felt dizzy for days. How I'd brushed it off as stress, as nerves, as heartbreak. And then, the night I sat in my room, shaking, realizing my body was changing in ways I couldn't explain. I never told anyone, not even him, because before I could, he was gone. And I was too scared to face what that meant. My mother, she must have known. She must have seen. She sent me away to stay with my aunt in another town to rest. That's what she called it. Rest. But it wasn't rest. It was hiding. The baby was born that winter. A girl. Tiny, fragile, perfect. I remember holding her once, just once, before my mother took her from my arms. She said, "This is what's best, Margaret. You're too young. You'll ruin both your lives." I cried until there were no tears left. And when I woke up the next morning, they told me she was gone. That she had been adopted by a family in another city. That I should forget. That it never happened. And I did what I was told. I tried to forget. I told myself it was just a dream. A nightmare that never truly happened. But now, 40 years later, here she was. In a photograph. With him. My hands were shaking so hard the photo slipped again. I knelt on the floor, pressing my forehead against it, sobbing in a way I hadn't since I was 20. All those years, the silence, the ache, the emptiness. And all along, he had been raising our daughter. He must have found her. He must have somehow discovered what my mother did. And he never told me. Maybe he thought he was protecting me. Maybe he thought I didn't want to know. Or maybe he was just too afraid that after everything I'd already moved on. I spent that night at the kitchen table, staring at that photograph, tracing the outline of her little face. I whispered, "Elizabeth." It felt strange on my tongue, her name. Our daughter's name. She'd grown up not knowing me, yet she'd carried a part of me her whole life, In her eyes, in her smile, in the stories he must have told her about a girl named Maggie from a seaside town. The next morning I made a decision. For the first time in decades, I wasn't afraid anymore. I needed to find her. I spent days searching online, calling every number I could find for a woman named Elizabeth Carter. Most didn't answer. Some hung up. But one afternoon when I was about to give up, a soft voice said, "Hello." I froze. It was her. I knew it. I could feel it. "Elizabeth," I said quietly. "This is Margaret Lane." There was a long pause. Then her voice trembled. "I was hoping you'd call." We talked for hours. She told me about her father, how he'd always spoken about a woman named Maggie, how he'd kept a wooden box of letters he never sent. Letters to me. And in those letters he'd written the truth, how he'd found out about the baby, how he'd searched for me, how he'd begged my mother to let him see me. She told me he'd died believing I'd chosen to forget, that I'd built a happy life without him. When she said that, my heart broke all over again. Because he had died carrying a lie my mother told to protect me from a scandal that never needed protecting from. "Do you want to meet?" she asked softly. And I said yes. Without hesitation. Without fear. We met at the old harbor, the same place her father and I had once said goodbye. The sky was gray again, and the air smelled of rain. When I saw her walking toward me, time stopped. She was older now, in her 40s, but she had his walk, his smile, and my eyes. She hugged me without a word. And in that moment, all the years between us, the pain, the loss, the silence, dissolved. I whispered into her hair, "I'm so sorry." And she said, "He already forgave you. I think he was just waiting for you to forgive yourself." We sat by the water for hours. She told me about her life, her children, her husband, the things her father used to say about me, how he'd always end his stories with, "She was the one I never stopped loving." Before she left, she gave me something. A small notebook. Her father's journal. She said he wanted me to have it if she ever found me. That night I opened it. The first page said, in his handwriting, "For Maggie, the one who taught me that love isn't about staying. It's about never forgetting." I cried until dawn. Not from pain this time, but from something deeper. From knowing that after all these years our love had survived everything. Time, silence, distance, even death. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. But as I closed the journal, one last folded page slipped out. It wasn't part of the journal. It was something else, something written just weeks before he died. It began with the words, "If she ever finds this, tell her the truth I could never say." And what followed was the one secret that changed everything I thought I knew. I didn't read the last page right away. I just held it in my trembling hands, afraid of what it might tell me. You see, sometimes the truth is heavier than the lie that kept you safe. Sometimes it takes a lifetime to be ready to hear it. But I had come too far to stop now. So I unfolded it slowly, carefully, as though I were opening a door to the past one last time. The paper was thin, yellowed at the edges, and the ink had bled slightly, as if tears had fallen there once before mine. And at the top, in his handwriting, that same familiar, gentle scrawl, it said, "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, it means time has done what I couldn't. It has brought you back to me." My breath caught. His voice filled my mind. I could almost hear him reading the words himself. "I spent half my life waiting for the chance to tell you the truth. The truth I couldn't say. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't want to break what was left of you." I traced each line with my finger, my heart pounding with every word. "After you disappeared, I searched everywhere. Your mother told me you wanted nothing to do with me, that you had moved away, found someone new, and wanted to forget. I believed her, until the day I found the letter she'd hidden." My chest tightened. A letter. Hidden. What letter? "It was yours, Maggie. The one you wrote before you left. You said you were scared, that you didn't know how to tell me about the baby, that you didn't want to ruin my life. You said you loved me, always had, always would." My eyes burned as I whispered, "She lied to both of us." I went to her house that night. I begged her to tell me where you were. She wouldn't. She said you were gone, that you'd given the baby up, and that you'd never forgive me if I tried to find you. And I believed her because I didn't want to hurt you anymore. The words blurred as my tears fell onto the page. He had been searching for me. All that time I thought he'd abandoned me, but he had been fighting to reach me. When I found our daughter, she was 6 years old. Her name was Elizabeth. I knew at the moment I saw her eyes. I adopted her, Maggie, not because I wanted to erase the past, but because I wanted to protect it. I wanted to protect her, and maybe in some way protect you too. My hands shook. He had raised her. He had given her the love I was too young and too broken to give. Every bedtime story, every smile, every lesson. All the things I thought I'd missed, she'd had them because of him. I never married. People said I was foolish, that I should move on. But how could I, when every time I looked at her I saw you? I told her about you, Maggie. About the girl who loved books and rain and quiet mornings. About how she changed my life with one smile. My tears fell faster now, unstoppable, hot against my wrinkled skin. If you ever find this, I want you to know something. I never stopped loving you. I forgave you long before you ever needed forgiveness. Because you gave me the greatest gift anyone ever could, our daughter. And through her, I've loved you every single day of my life. I covered my mouth, sobbing softly, whispering his name like a prayer. Don't carry the weight anymore, my love. The past is not a punishment. It's a path. And every step we took, even apart, was leading us here, to this truth, this peace. At the bottom of the page, his final line was written in shaky ink, as if his hand had grown weak. If love is a circle, then you and I, we were never apart. Just walking toward each other from different sides. I pressed the letter to my heart. The clock ticked softly beside me. The house was quiet, but for the first time I didn't feel alone. I walked to the window. The rain had begun again, gentle and steady. Felt like a blessing. Outside, the world shimmered in silver light, and I thought of him, standing by the old harbor, smiling that soft, crooked smile. I whispered into the night, I found the letter, Thomas. I found you. And I could almost hear his voice in the wind. I was always right here. That night, I placed his letter in the same wooden box that held all the others. But this time I didn't close it with sorrow. I closed it with gratitude. Because love, real love, doesn't end. It changes form. It becomes memory, warmth, forgiveness, and peace. And maybe that's all any of us are really looking for. When I turned off the lamp and the room faded into darkness, I smiled. For the first time in 60 years, my heart was quiet. I had finally forgiven myself. I had finally come home. And before I go, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Did my story remind you of someone you once loved? Or someone you still miss? If this story touched your heart, please let me know in the comments. Your words mean more than you think. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Stories by